Jin-Ho was fixing the air filter in the lower part of the space station when the alarm started. Screaming, the red lights flashed on and off, making everything look scary and dangerous. He had been working on the broken filter for 2 hours already. His hands were dirty with grease and oil, but he was almost done fixing it. The space station was called New Seoul Station, and it was home to 5,000 people. Most of them were humans, but there were also some friendly aliens who worked with them. Jin-Ho had been working there for 3 years as a mechanic. He fixed everything from air filters to computer systems to broken doors. People always called him when something was not working right. He was a simple man who loved his job. Jin-Ho was 28 years old and had short black hair and kind eyes. He always wore his old leather tool belt that his father had given him when he was 16 years old. The belt was brown and worn from years of use. It had many pockets and loops where he kept all his tools. When the alarm started, Jin-Ho looked up from his work. He could hear people screaming and running in the corridors above him. The sound of energy weapons firing echoed through the metal walls of the station. He knew this was not a drill. This was real danger. Jin-Ho tried to use his communication device to call the security office, but there was no answer. He could hear the sound of explosions getting closer and closer. His heart started beating faster. He had never been in a real fight before. He was just a mechanic who fixed things. The sound of heavy footsteps came down the corridor toward where he was working. Jin-Ho looked around for a place to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The corridor was long and narrow with no doors or side passages. He was trapped. 3 tall aliens came around the corner. They had blue skin and 4 arms each. Their eyes glowed red in the dark corridor. They wore black armor and carried large energy weapons. Jin-Ho had never seen aliens like these before. They looked mean and dangerous. The biggest alien was clearly the leader. He was almost 3 meters tall with scars on his face and arms. His armor had gold markings on it. That showed he was important. He looked at Jin-Ho with disgust, like he was looking at a bug. Another weak human, the alien leader said in broken English. His voice was deep and scary. You carry no weapons. You're nothing but prey. Jin-Ho slowly raised his hands above his head. He did not want to make the aliens angry. His tool belt made soft jingling sounds as he moved. The leather belt was heavy with all his tools inside it. He had screwdrivers and wrenches and wire cutters and many other things he used for his work. The 3 aliens looked at his belt and started laughing. They thought his tools were just junk. They could not understand why a human would carry such simple things. The alien leader pointed at the belt with one of his 4 arms and said something in his own language. The other aliens laughed even harder. Please, Jin-Ho said quietly. I'm just a worker. I do not want any trouble. I just fix things that are broken. I have never hurt anyone. The alien leader stepped closer. His red eyes glowed brighter in the dark. His breath smelled like metal and something rotten. You humans are all the same, he said, weak and scared, always begging for your lives. One of the other aliens grabbed Jin-Ho by the arm with 2 of his hands. His grip was very strong and painful. Jin-Ho tried not to cry out. The alien dragged him down the corridor while the other 2 aliens walked behind them. As they walked, Jin-Ho saw terrible things. The aliens had killed many people and destroyed much of the station. Bodies of humans and friendly aliens lay on the floor. Smoke filled the air and sparks flew from broken machines. Jin-Ho felt sick, but he tried to stay calm. They brought him to the main cargo bay where many other humans were already captured. The aliens had put them all in a large cage made of energy bars that glowed blue. Most of the prisoners were crying or shaking with fear. Jin-Ho saw people he knew from the station. There was Somin, who worked in the gardens growing food for everyone. She was 25 years old with long black hair, and she always smiled when she saw Jin-Ho. Now she looked scared and sad. There was also Tae-won, who ran the cafeteria where everyone ate their meals. He was 60 years old with gray hair and wrinkled hands. He had always been kind to Jin-Ho, giving him extra food when he worked late. Now the old man sat in the corner of the cage looking very tired. The alien guards threw Jin-Ho into the cage with the others. The energy bars felt hot when he got too close to them. He sat down next to So-min and Tae-won. They looked at him with hope in their eyes. Jin-Ho, they whispered, what are we going to do? These aliens are going to sell us as slaves. Jin-Ho looked around at all the scared faces. He saw children crying and old people shaking. With fear, he felt angry that these aliens thought they could just take people like they were things to be bought and sold. The Alien leader came to the cage and looked at all the prisoners. You are all going to the outer rim markets, he said. You will work for new masters until you die. No one will come to save you. Your pathetic human government cannot reach you where we are going. Jinho touched his tool belt. The leather was warm from his body heat. He could feel all his tools inside their pockets and loops. His father Sungho had taught him that every tool had many uses. A screwdriver was not just for screws. A wrench was not just for bolts. Wire was not just for connecting things. The other prisoners looked at Jinho, and somehow they knew that he was different. He was not just crying or giving up. He was thinking and planning. His fingers moved slightly on his belt, feeling each tool and thinking about what he could do with them. The aliens had made a big mistake. They thought humans were weak because they did not carry big weapons like alien soldiers, but humans had something better than weapons. They had brains that could solve problems. They had hands that could build things. And they had hearts that never gave up. Jinho looked at the alien guards walking around the cargo bay. They were lazy and not paying attention. They thought the humans were no danger at all. They were wrong about that. Jinho had been building things since he was a small child. His father had taught him that there was always a way to fix any problem. Sometimes Jinho thought quietly to himself, fixing things meant breaking other things first. The aliens thought they had captured helpless prey, but they had actually captured something much more dangerous. They had captured a human who knew how to use tools. The other prisoners could see something changing in Jinho. His scared look was going away and being replaced by something else. It was the look of a man who had a plan. So Min and Tae-won moved closer to him. They wanted to help however they could. Jinho whispered very quietly to them so the guards could not hear. We are going to get out of here. I do not know how yet, but we will find a way. Humans always find a way. The aliens continued to guard them, but they were not worried. The humans looked so weak and helpless without their technology. What could they possibly do with no weapons and no way to fight back? They were about to find out that they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had underestimated what a human could do with nothing but simple tools and a mind that refused to give up. The Vectari ship was huge and dark, like a metal monster floating in space. Jinho had never seen anything so big before. The walls were black metal covered with strange alien symbols that glowed with green light. The air smelled like oil and something else that made his nose burn. The aliens moved all the prisoners from the space station into the ship. Through a loading ramp, Jinho walked slowly with the others, keeping his head down, but his eyes were always watching everything. He saw how the ship was built, where the corridors led, and how many guards were walking around. They put all the human prisoners in one big room that had metal bars instead of walls. The room was cold and there were no windows. Jinho could feel the ship moving through space, but he could not see outside. The floor was hard metal that hurt to sit on for too long. There were about 50 humans in the prison room with Jinho. Most of them were from New Seoul Station, but some were from other places. The aliens had been collecting humans from many different locations. Jinho realized this was not just a random attack. These aliens were professional slave. Traderso Min sat next to Jinho on the cold floor. She was trying to be brave, but he could see she was scared. Her hands were shaking, and she kept looking at the alien guards who walked back and forth outside their prison. Jinho wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but he did not want to. Lee Tae-won was sitting in the corner looking very tired. The old man had worked hard all his life, and now he was a prisoner on an alien ship. He kept talking about his grandchildren back on Earth, wondering if he would ever see them again. The alien guards brought them food twice each day. The food was terrible. It looked like gray paste and tasted like metal mixed with dirt, but the prisoners had to eat it or they would starve. Many of the humans got sick from the alien food, but the guards did not care. Jinho ate the food without complaining. He needed to stay strong for what was coming. He spent his time watching the guards and learning their routines. The aliens were not very careful. They thought humans were too weak and stupid to be dangerous. On the second day, something happened that changed everything. 2 alien prisoners from another part of the ship started fighting in the corridor outside the human prison. The fight was loud and violent. The aliens were hitting each other with their fists and claws. 3 Vectari guards ran into the corridor carrying shock sticks that crackled with blue electricity. They started hitting everyone near the fight. including some humans who were just sitting quietly. One guard was very angry and he looked around for someone else to hit. The guard saw Jin-ho sitting near the bars with his tool belt around his waist. The alien pointed at the belt with one of his forearms. "No weapons allowed," he said in his deep, scary voice. His claws were long and sharp. Jin-ho stood up slowly and took a step back. "It is just tools, sir," he said calmly, "for fixing things. See?" He pulled out a simple wrench from his belt and held it up so the guard could see it. "I can fix your ship if something breaks." The guard looked at the wrench for a long time. He turned it over in his hands, examining it closely. It was just a plain metal tool, nothing special about it. The guard looked at Jin-ho, who seemed so weak and harmless. Then the alien started laughing. "Look at this pathetic human," the guard said to his friends. "He thinks his little toys are important." The other guards came over and they all laughed at Jin-ho and his simple wrench. They thought it was very funny that a human would carry such basic tools. The guard threw the wrench back at Jin-ho. "Keep your junk, human," he said. "You will need it when your new masters make you fix their machines." The guards walked away, still laughing about the stupid human with his worthless tools, but the guards did not know something very important about Jin-ho. His father Sung-ho had been a master builder who could make anything with his hands. Sung-ho had taught his son that every tool was special and could be used in many different ways. When Jin-ho was 5 years old, his father showed him how a screwdriver could be used to pry things apart or to punch holes in metal. When he was 10, his father taught him that wire could be used to make electrical connections or to tie things together or even to pick locks. By the time Jin-ho was 15, he knew that any tool could become a weapon if you used it the right way. A hammer could break things, a knife could cut more than just food, and a simple piece of wire could become a trap or a trigger or even a bomb. That night, when the ship was quiet and most of the prisoners were trying to sleep, Jin-ho began to work. His fingers moved carefully in the dark, taking apart some of his tools and putting them back together in new ways. He took a small motor from his sonic screwdriver and connected it to a battery from his light. The motor could spin very fast, and if he attached the right things to it, he could make it do more than just turn screws. Jin-ho found some thin wire in his belt and wrapped it around the motor in a special way. His father had taught him this technique years ago. Now the motor could create electricity instead of just using it. It was like a tiny generator. So Min was watching him work. Even though she was pretending to sleep, she could see his hands moving in the darkness, and she knew he was building something. She did not know what it was, but she trusted Jin-ho. He was smart and brave, and he never gave up. Jin-ho took apart a small spring from one of his tools and bent it into a new shape. He attached it to a piece of metal from his belt buckle. Now he had made a trigger that would work when someone stepped on it or touched it. The alien guards walked by their prison many times during the night, but they never looked closely at what the humans were doing. They thought the prisoners were just sleeping or crying. They could not imagine that one of them was building weapons from simple repair tools. Jin-ho worked for 3 hours that night. When he was finished, he had created several small devices that looked like harmless pieces of junk, but each one was actually a weapon or a tool that could help them escape. He hid the devices in different pockets of his belt where the guards would not think to look. Even if they searched him, they would just see broken tools and spare parts. They would never guess that Jin-ho had turned his repair kit into an arsenal. The next morning, Jin-ho looked the same as always. He ate his terrible food and sat quietly with the other prisoners, but So-min and Tae-won could see something different in his eyes. He was not just a scared prisoner anymore. He was a man with a plan. Jin-ho knew that humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest or the smartest, but they had one thing that made them special. They could take anything and turn it into something else. They could adapt and improvise and survive. The aliens thought they had captured weak prey, but they had actually captured something much more dangerous. They had captured a human who knew that every problem had a solution, and Jin-ho was about to show them just how wrong they were about humans. On the third day of their journey, the ship started making very strange noises. Jin-ho was sitting with the other prisoners when he heard a deep, rumbling sound coming from somewhere below them. The sound was not normal. It was the kind of noise that machines make when something is very wrong. The rumbling got louder and louder until the whole ship was shaking. Other prisoners started getting scared, and some of them began crying. The alien guards looked worried too. They were talking to each other. in their own language very fast and pointing at the walls. Suddenly all the lights in the ship went out for a few seconds. Then emergency lights came on, making everything look red and scary. The rumbling noise got even worse, and now there were other sounds too, like metal grinding against metal and electrical sparks flying. Jin-ho knew these sounds very well. He had been fixing machines his whole life. When a machine made noises like this, it meant something very important was broken. The ship was in serious trouble, and if they could not fix it soon, they would all die in space. The Vectari crew was running around the ship trying to figure out what was wrong. Jin-ho could hear them shouting and arguing. They were scared because they knew their ship was breaking down and they were still 2 days away from their destination. After about an hour of terrible noises and shaking, the captain of the ship came to the prison room. Jin-ho had seen him before, but never this close. Captain Krell-tok was huge even for a Vectari. He had scars all over his blue skin and his red eyes looked mean and angry. The captain looked at all the human prisoners like he was trying to decide something. His forearms were crossed and he was breathing hard. Jin-ho could tell he was very worried about his ship. The captain said, pointing one of his arms at Jin-ho the human with tools. "Can you fix engines?" Jin-ho stood up slowly. He knew this was a very important moment. If he said no, the captain might kill him, but if he said yes, he might get a chance to learn more about the ship and find a way to escape. "I can try," Jin-ho said. "I have fixed many different kinds of machines. Maybe I can help with your engines." The captain stared at Jin-ho for a long time, trying to decide if he could trust a human prisoner. Finally, he nodded to two of his guards. "Take him to the engine room," he said, "but watch him carefully. If he tries anything stupid, kill him." The two guards grabbed Jin-ho by his arms and walked him out of the prison room. So-min and Tae-won watched him go with worried faces. They did not know if they would ever see him again. Jin-ho tried to look confident, but inside he was very scared. The guards took him through many corridors and down several levels. Jin-ho tried to remember the way they were going. He noticed where all the doors led and how many guards were at each checkpoint. This information might be very important later. Finally, they reached the engine room and Jin-ho could not believe what he saw. The room was enormous with machines that were bigger than buildings. The engines were nothing like human technology, but Jin-ho could see they worked on similar principles. There were about 10 Vectari engineers in the room and they all looked very upset. They were arguing with each other and pointing at different parts of the giant machines. Some of them were hitting the engines with tools, which Jin-ho knew was always a bad idea. One of the engineers saw Jin-ho and laughed. "This is your solution," he said to the guards, "a weak human with primitive tools. How can he fix what we cannot?" But the chief engineer was older and wiser. He looked at Jin-ho more carefully. "Human," he said, "you really think you can help us?" Jin-ho walked closer to the engines and listened to the sounds they were making. He could hear the problem right away. One of the main power couplings was out of alignment. It was causing the whole system to vibrate and shake. The coupling was in a very small space that was too tight for the big Vectari engineers to reach, but Jin-ho was smaller and his hands were more flexible. He could get into spaces that the aliens could need to crawl inside there. Jin-ho said, pointing to a small opening in the engine. "The problem is in the power coupling. I can fix it, but I need my tool." The chief engineer looked at the other Vectari. They were all desperate. The ship was getting worse every hour and they were running out of time. Finally, the chief engineer nodded. "Let him try." Jin-ho crawled into the small space inside the engine with his tools. It was hot and cramped, but he could see the problem clearly. The power coupling had come loose and was bouncing around, causing all the noise and shaking. Using his tools, Jin-ho carefully realigned the coupling and tightened it back into place. It took him almost 2 hours of careful work, but finally the terrible noises stopped. The ship stopped shaking and the lights went back to normal. When Jin-ho crawled out of the engine, the Vectari engineers were all staring at him with amazement. They could not believe that a human had fixed their advanced technology. The chief engineer actually smiled at him. "Good work, human," he said. "You understand machines better than some of our own people." Captain Krell-tok came to the engine room when he heard the repairs were finished. He looked at Jin-ho with new respect in his red eyes. "You may live longer than the others," he said, but Jin-ho had learned much more than just how to fix the engines. During his time in the engine room, he had been studying everything around him. He learned how the ship worked, where all the important systems were located, and most importantly, where they kept their weapons. He saw that the armory was very close to the engine room. It was protected by an electronic lock that looked complicated to the aliens, but Jin-Ho knew it was actually quite simple. His tools could easily bypass a lock like that. Jin-Ho also learned about the ship's layout. He knew where the bridge was located, where the guards slept, and how many exits there were. He memorized the patrol routes and the timing of the guard changes. The guards took him back to the prison room, and the other prisoners gathered around him. They wanted to know what he had seen and learned. Jin-Ho was very careful about what he said, because he knew the guards were listening. That night, when the ship was quiet, Jin-Ho whispered to So-min and Tae-won about what he had discovered. He told them about the armory and the ship's layout. He explained that the aliens were not as smart as they thought they were. "I have a plan," Jin-Ho said quietly, "but we will need to work together, and we will need to be very brave." So-min and Tae-won nodded. They were ready to do whatever it took to escape from their alien captors. They trusted Jin-Ho completely, and they knew that humans were much stronger than the aliens believed. The other prisoners saw them whispering, and they moved closer. They wanted to know what was happening. Some of them looked hopeful for the first time since they had been captured. Jin-Ho looked at all the faces around him. These were good people who deserved to be free. The aliens had made a terrible mistake when they captured humans. They thought they were getting weak slaves, but they had actually captured the most dangerous species in the galaxy, humans who had nothing left to lose and the knowledge to turn anything into a weapon. Jin-Ho had been watching the alien guards for 5 days now, and he knew their routines perfectly. The guards were lazy and bored. They thought the human prisoners were no danger at all, so they did not pay much attention to what was happening in the prison room. There were always 2 guards outside the prison during the day and only 1 guard at night. The guards changed shifts every 8 hours, and there was always a few minutes when the old guard left before the new guard arrived. That was the best time to escape. Jin-Ho had been using his tools to create special devices. Every night while the other prisoners slept, he worked very quietly so the guards would not hear him. His fingers moved like a magician, making impossible things. From ordinary tools, from the small motor in his sonic screwdriver, he had made a tiny explosive device. It was not very powerful, but it would be enough to break the electronic lock on the armory door. The explosive was hidden inside what looked like a broken piece of his belt. Jin-Ho had also made lockpicks from pieces of wire and metal springs. The lockpicks looked like ordinary spare parts, but they could open most electronic locks. He had tested them on the smaller locks around the ship. When the guards were not looking, the most clever thing Jin-Ho had built was a small device that could disrupt electronic systems. It was made from parts of his communication device and some copper wire. When activated, it would shut down the prison room's lock for exactly 30 seconds. But the most important part of his plan was not the devices he had built. It was the people around him. Jin-Ho had been talking quietly to the other prisoners, learning about their skills and abilities. He was surprised by how talented they were. So-min had been a soldier before she became a gardener. She knew how to fight and how to move silently. She was small and fast, and the aliens always underestimated her because she looked so gentle. And Tae-won was old, but he was very smart. He had been a communications officer in the Space Navy before he retired. He knew how to operate alien technology, and he could jam their communication systems. There was also a young man named Han-woo who had been a security guard on the space station. He was strong and brave, and he knew how to use weapons. Jin-Ho realized that the aliens had not captured helpless victims. They had captured trained fighters. A woman named Eunji had been a computer programmer. She could hack into alien systems if she could get access to a terminal. There was also a man named Dong-soo who had been a pilot. He could fly the alien ship if they managed to take control of it. Jin-Ho smiled when he realized what the aliens had done. They thought they were capturing weak humans to sell as slaves, but they had actually captured a complete crew of skilled professionals who knew how to fight and how to operate spaceships. The plan Jin-Ho created was simple, but it required perfect timing. First, he would use his electronic disruptor to open the prison room lock. Then he would sneak to the armory and steal weapons for everyone else while Jin-Ho was getting the weapons. So-min and Han-woo would create a distraction. They would start a fight with some of the alien prisoners in the next room. The guards would come running to stop the fight, and they would not notice the humans escaping. Tae-won would use his knowledge of alien technology to shut down the ship's communication systems, so the aliens could not call for help. Ryuji would hack into the ship's computer and take control of the life support systems. Finally, Dong-Su would go to the bridge and take control of the ship's navigation. They would fly back to human space and deliver the alien slavers to the authorities. The plan was dangerous, but it could work if everyone did their part perfectly. Jin-Ho spent 2 more days explaining the plan to each person individually. He could not risk having all the humans meet together because the guards might become suspicious. Each person had to learn their role and trust that the others would do theirs. The night before the escape, Jin-Ho could not sleep. He kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong. If the guards caught them, they would all be killed. The aliens would not give them a second chance, but Jin-Ho also thought about his father, Sung-Ho, who had taught him that every problem had a solution. His father had always said that humans were special because they never gave up no matter how hopeless things seemed. So-min was also awake that night. She was scared, but she was also excited. Finally, they were going to fight back against their captors. She had been a soldier and she knew that sometimes you had to take risks to win your freedom. Tae-won was thinking about his grandchildren back on Earth. He wanted to see them again and tell them stories about how their grandfather had helped defeat alien slavers. He was old, but he was not ready to die as a slave. The other prisoners were nervous, but they were also hopeful. For the first time since they had been captured, they felt like they had some control over their fate. They were not just victims anymore, they were fighters. Jin-Ho looked at his old leather tool belt one more time. Tomorrow, it would either save their lives or get them all killed. His father had given him the belt on his 16th birthday, saying that a man's tools were his most precious possession. Sung-Ho had been right, but in ways he never could have imagined. The tools were not just for fixing machines. They were for fixing situations, and sometimes the situation that needed fixing was being a prisoner on an alien slave ship. Jin-Ho touched each tool in his belt and whispered a small prayer to his father. He asked for strength and courage, and most of all he asked for the wisdom to use his tools in the right way at the right time. The ship was quiet now, with only the soft hum of the engines and the breathing of sleeping prisoners. In a few hours, everything would change. The aliens thought they had captured weak humans, but they were about to learn a very important lesson. Never underestimate a human with tools and the knowledge to use them, because the most dangerous weapon in the universe was not a gun or a bomb or a missile. It was a human mind that refused to accept defeat. Tomorrow, the aliens would discover what happened when you captured humans and gave them time to think and plan. They would learn that humans were not prey, they were predators who had been pretending to be harmless. And Jin-Ho would show them that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was the quiet one with the tool belt who everyone thought was just a simple mechanic. The night of the escape finally arrived, and Jin-Ho felt his heart beating so fast he was sure the guards could hear it. The ship was quiet except for the soft humming of the engines and the distant sound of alien voices from the crew quarters. Jin-Ho waited until the guard change at midnight. He had timed it perfectly. The old guard walked away from the prison room, and there would be exactly 4 minutes before the new guard arrived. Those 4 minutes were all he needed. Jin-Ho pulled out his electronic disruptor device that looked like a broken piece of his belt. He had tested it many times in his mind, but this was the first time he would use it for real. He pressed the small button he had hidden inside the device. The electronic lock on the prison room door made a soft clicking sound and then went dark. The red light that showed the lock was active turned off. Jin-Ho held his breath, waiting to see if any alarms would sound, but the ship stayed quiet. The door opened silently, and Jin-Ho slipped out into the corridor. His soft shoes made no sound on the metal floor. He moved like a shadow, staying close to the walls and avoiding the areas where he knew security cameras were located. Jin-Ho had memorized every step of the route to the armory. During his time in the engine room, he knew exactly where to turn and which corridors to avoid. The ship was huge, but he moved through it like he had lived there his whole life. The armory door was protected by a more complex lock than the prison room, but Jin-Ho was ready for it. He pulled out his small explosive device and carefully attached it to the lock mechanism. The device was no bigger than his thumb, but it was perfectly designed for this job. Jin-Ho moved away from the door and activated the explosive. The blast was so quiet it sounded like someone dropping a small tool on the floor, but the electronic lock was completely destroyed. The armory door swung open, revealing rows of alien weapons inside the armory. Jinho found energy rifles, plasma grenades, shock sticks, and many other weapons he did not recognize. He grabbed as many as he could carry and started making his way back to the prison room. He had to hurry because the new guard would arrive soon. Meanwhile, back in the prison room, So-min and Hyun-woo had started their part of the plan. They began arguing loudly with a group of alien prisoners from another world. The argument quickly turned into a fight with shouting and pushing. The alien prisoners were confused and angry. They did not understand why the humans were suddenly attacking them. The noise grew louder and louder until it echoed through the entire ship. Other prisoners from different worlds joined the fight. 2 Vectari guards came running to see what was happening. They saw what looked like a typical prison fight and rushed in with their shock sticks. They began hitting everyone they could reach, trying to restore order. None of the guards noticed that several humans were missing from the fight. They were too busy trying to stop the violence to count how many prisoners there were. The distraction was working perfectly. Jinho returned to the prison room through a different route and quietly handed out weapons to the other humans. Each person took what they needed and hid the weapons under their clothes. The guards were still busy with the fight. A1 took a small device that Jinho had made from parts of his communication equipment. The device could jam the ship's internal communication system. When activated, it would prevent the aliens from calling for help or coordinating their defense. Yeonji received a special tool that could hack into alien computer systems. She would use it to take control of the ship's life support and security systems. Once she had control, she could lock the aliens out of their own ship. Dong-soo got a map that Jinho had drawn showing the route to the bridge he would need to get there and take control of the ship's navigation system so they could fly back to human space. The fight in the prison room was getting more violent and the guards were becoming overwhelmed. They called for backup, but Taewon activated his jamming device and their communications were cut off. The guards did not understand what was happening. Jinho looked at his fellow humans and saw determination in their eyes. They were no longer scared prisoners. They were fighters who were ready to take back their freedom. The aliens had made a terrible mistake by underestimating them. Now, Jinho said quietly, "It is time." The humans moved out of the prison room in small groups, spreading through the ship like water flowing through cracks. Each person knew their job, and they moved with purpose and confidence. So-min and Hyun-woo led a group of humans to take control of the ship's security station. They moved silently through the corridors, using their military training to avoid detection. When they reached the security station, they found only 2 guards. The guards were surprised to see humans outside of the prison room, and they reached for their weapons, but So-min was faster. She had been trained as a soldier, and she knew how to fight. The guards were unconscious before they could sound an alarm. Unji reached the main computer terminal and began hacking into the ship's systems. Her fingers moved quickly across the alien keyboard. She had studied their technology during her time in the engine room, and she knew how their systems worked within minutes. Unji had gained access to the ship's main computer. She began shutting down non-essential systems and taking control of the life support. The aliens would soon find that their own ship was working against them. Dong-soo made his way to the bridge. Moving carefully through the upper levels of the ship, he encountered several alien crew members, but they were not expecting trouble. Most of them were unarmed, and he was able to avoid them. The bridge was protected by 2 guards, but they were not paying attention. They thought the ship was secure, and they were talking casually about their plans for the human slaves. Dong-soo waited for the right moment and then struck. Meanwhile, Jinho was leading another group of humans through the lower levels of the ship. They were heading for the engine room where they could take control of the ship's power systems. If they controlled the engines, they controlled the ship. The aliens were beginning to realize that something was wrong. Guards were not responding to calls, and some of the ship's systems were malfunctioning, but they did not understand what was happening. Jinho reached the engine room and found 3 Vectari engineers working on routine maintenance. They looked up in surprise when they saw humans with weapons. The engineers had never expected to see prisoners in their engine room. "Surrender," Jinho said calmly. "We do not want to hurt you, but we will if we have to." The engineers looked at each other and then at the weapons the humans were carrying. They were not fighters, and they knew they could not win against armed opponents. They raised their hands and surrendered. Jinho smiled as he heard the ship's communication system crackle to life. "Attention, Vektari crew," came his own voice over the speakers. "This is your former prisoner speaking. We now control your ship. Surrender peacefully and no one gets hurt." The aliens could not believe what they were hearing. How could weak, helpless humans take over their ship? But as they ran through the corridors, they found armed humans at every turn using their own weapons against them. The impossible had happened. The prey had become the predators and the hunters had become the hunted. Captain Kreltok stood in his command center surrounded by what remained of his crew. The bridge was the last place on the ship that the humans had not taken control of yet. He could not believe what was happening to his ship and his crew. The captain had been a warrior for 30 years. He had fought in many battles and conquered many worlds. He had never been defeated by any enemy. But now he was being beaten by weak humans who were supposed to be his slaves. "It is impossible," he said to his remaining officers. "Humans have no weapons technology. They are a primitive species that barely knows how to travel between stars. How can they defeat us?" His officers looked just as confused as he was. They had studied human technology and knew it was far behind. Vektari science humans used simple tools and basic machines. They were not warriors or conquerors. They were farmers and builders, but the evidence was all around them. The ship's systems were under human control. The communication channels were filled with human voices giving orders. The security cameras showed humans with Vektari weapons guarding important areas. Suddenly, the bridge door exploded inward with a loud bang that made everyone jump. Smoke filled the room, and through the smoke came Jinho walking calmly forward. He carried a Vektari energy rifle in his hands, and he looked completely different from the scared prisoner they had captured behind. Jinho came Somin, Taewon, Hyanwoo, and a dozen other humans, all armed with alien weapons. They spread out around the bridge, covering every exit. The Vektari officers reached for their weapons, but stopped when they saw how many humans there were. "You are right," Jinho said with a slight smile on his face. "We do not have advanced weapons, but we have something much better." Captain Kreltok looked at Jinho with his 4 red eyes wide with fear and confusion. What could humans possibly have that was better than advanced weapons? What could primitive creatures like humans use against superior alien technology? Jinho pointed to his old leather tool belt that was still hanging around his waist. The simple tools that the aliens had laughed at now looked different somehow. They looked dangerous and important instead of worthless. "And a primitive every human child learns to use tools," Jinho said calmly. "We take simple things and make them into whatever we need. Your lockpicks, your explosives, your electronic jammers, we built them all from parts of my repair kit." The captain stared at the tool belt, trying to understand what Jinho was saying. The tools still looked like ordinary repair equipment. How could such simple things be used to take over an entire spaceship? "We made weapons from anything," Somnin said proudly, "because humans do not just use tools. We are tools, living, thinking, adapting tools that can solve any problem." Jinho reached into his belt and pulled out one of his devices. It looked like a collection of random parts, wire and metal pieces held together with tape, but when he activated it, all the lights on the bridge flickered and went out for a moment. "This was made from a motor, a battery, and some copper wire," Jinho explained. "It can shut down any electronic system for 30 seconds. That is how we opened our prison door." He pulled out another device that looked like a bent piece of metal with a spring attached. "This was made from a wrench and a door spring," Jinho said. "It can pick any lock or trigger any mechanism. That is how we got into your armory." Captain Kreltok looked at his crew and saw the same fear and understanding in their eyes. These humans had not just escaped from their prison. They had turned ordinary repair tools into weapons of war. They had used their intelligence to defeat superior technology. "What do you want?" the captain asked quietly. He knew he was beaten, and he knew his crew was beaten. The humans had outsmarted them. "Completely simple," Jinho said. "You are going to take us home, and you are going to spread the word to every alien species in the galaxy. Humans might look weak, they might not carry obvious weapons, but never ever assume they are harmless." Jinho patted his tool belt one more time and smiled. "Because the most dangerous weapon in the universe is a human who knows how to fix things. And sometimes the first thing that needs fixing is the situation they are in." The captain looked around at his bridge, now controlled by humans with alien weapons. He thought about his ship, now operated by human prisoners. He thought about his crew, now following orders from former slaves. How did we not see this? He whispered to himself. How did we not know what humans really were because you looked at us and saw what you wanted to see, Taewon said, stepping forward. You saw weak creatures who could be easily controlled. You did not see what we really are. And what are you really? The captain asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. We are the species that survived ice ages and asteroid impacts, So Min said. We are the species that learned to fly by watching birds and learned to swim by watching fish. We are the species that turned rocks into tools and tools into machines and machines into spaceships. Hyun-woo added, we take whatever we find and make it into what we need. We are the species that never gives up, never surrenders, and never accepts defeat. Eunji said from her position at the computer terminal. We adapt and overcome and survive. Jin-ho looked at Captain Krell-tok and saw something he had never seen before. In a Vectaria look of respect mixed with fear, the captain finally understood what humans really were. You made a mistake when you captured us, Jin-ho said quietly. You thought you were getting slaves, but you actually got something much more dangerous. You got humans who had nothing left to lose. The captain nodded slowly. He understood now why his species had never been able to truly conquer humanity. Despite their superior technology, humans were not just another species to be defeated. They were something unique and dangerous. From this day forward, the captain said, I will make sure every alien species knows the truth about humans. They look harmless, but they are the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. Jin-ho smiled and looked around at his fellow humans. They had done the impossible. They had defeated their captors using nothing but simple tools and human intelligence. They had proven that humans were not prey, they were predators. The Vectari ship turned around and headed back toward Earth, carrying a very different cargo than what it had started with. Word would spread quickly through the galaxy about the humans who had defeated their alien captors with nothing but repair tools and clever thinking. And Jin-ho kept his father's leather belt, knowing that Seung-ho would be proud his son had used the tools he had been given to fix the most important thing of all, their freedom and the respect of the entire galaxy.